Good morning. How is everybody this morning? That's great. We're going to have a study in context, how to get the right word out of context. I used the word scary in talking to some folks out there, and there was a husband, I won't name Jim Orman's name as being the one, but picked up on the word scary and then pointed at Pat. No, that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about my grandchild and my children. No, no, ma'am, not at all. Although I wasn't very nice to you Wednesday night, though. I'll admit, and I'll apologize right here. Pat walks in Wednesday night, and they were talking about rain this past Wednesday night. She had an umbrella, and I said, well, you came optimistically because the wind was terrible. And she said, well, you know what happens to sugar? And I said, yes, ma'am, it lumps. And that's not the answer she wanted from me. So I'll apologize for that now. I've thought about that. I thought, oh, man. So Jim called me Thursday and I said, okay. No. Anyway, any announcements that we need to make? Do remember, as you got a phone call yesterday, remember the Easter Bunny's coming here next Sunday. So remember that. Got any little children, little varmints? Children that you want to bring? Fine. You are asked to tell Missy, and so she can kind of keep a list, kind of know how many children are coming, be helpful. But anyway, anything else? All right. Well, turn to Genesis 43. We're ready for verse 8. We're kind of sprinting through this last part. I'm sure you're ready to move on to some other study, and this is a story aspect. It is a beautiful story with Joseph. And of course, we've gotten through Joseph's brothers selling him, Joseph having a dream, Joseph's brothers selling him off, Joseph rising in power, Joseph in prison, Joseph out of prison, Joseph rising in power again, and the famine has, excuse me, springtime. The famine has hit, and as the famine has hit, of course, the brothers have come, wanting food. And Joseph is over the whole deal. Joseph is over the food relief program, if you want to call it that. That's what we'll call it, just for simplification terms. Joseph is over the food relief program. They come. They don't know who he is. He recognizes them. They go home with the understanding they need to bring their little brother back. And it is at that point where we are, because they need to go back. And it says, beginning in verse 8, that Judah said to Israel, his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself be of surety for him, from my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned this second time. So it takes a while for Jacob, it takes a while for Israel to decide to let Ben go. And so finally Judah approaches him one day. And sometimes we do let problems fester. And it's really not a good thing. It's not a good thing. We should make a decision, we should make a plan, and we should move forward on that plan. But sometimes we let things stew, and admittedly, sometimes it takes a little while to think. But Israel, or Jacob, he is reluctant to send Benjamin because he believes Joseph is dead. He doesn't want to send Benjamin because now Benjamin has, so to speak, become his favorite child, and so he's reluctant. So Judah comes up to him and he says, look, we've been at this long enough that we could have already gone, got what we needed, and come back. Let's go. Send him on. I'll take full responsibility for little brother. And as I take full responsibility for little brother, I'll be an individual that not only takes full responsibility, but you can require anything in my hand, and we'll look at it that way. I'll be responsible for the rest of my life, and I'll see that this actually takes place, but that he comes back. That was sort of the promise, the implied promise. And their father, Israel, said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels, carry down a present for the man, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of the sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take your brother also, and arise, go back to the man. And may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So the men took that present and Benjamin. It's interesting in reading this week, but then reading it again last night. I appreciate the fact that he not only was sending the gift, and he not only was sending the money for what they needed this time, but, maybe he says is that they had slipped, Joseph had made sure the money was slipped back into the bag the first time. Maybe that was an oversight, so we're going to send him not only what we're going to owe him for this time, but also what we owed him for the last time. So there's a bit of honesty, if you will, in Israel, because how many folks, especially in this day and age, would say, that was their fault and that was their problem, and we're not going to mention it. And if we don't mention it, then that's to our good. And sadly today, the number of folks that look at that and say that's not dishonest. Well, you received a service, you received goods for it, and so you should have compensated them for it. And when I think of that, I think I shared with you the story one time. Years and years ago, Suzanne and I were on vacation. We were actually in Chattanooga. We had stopped at a Bojangles, I believe, and we had eaten, and we were looking at the ticket as we were eating, and they hadn't charged us for something in the meal. I forgot now. You remember? It's something in the meal. And so Suzanne went back up there and took money back up there, and they said, do what? And she was trying to explain to them that we still owed them some money. They were so surprised that somebody would claim that they said, it's on us, it's free. And so we took it, we gladly took it, because we were young and poor at that time. And so we said thank you, and we went on our way and enjoyed that. It tasted a little sweeter then. But this day and age, that's sad that happens. And people, they're tough luck. Well, Israel, Jacob says, no, we're going to send money back. And so they're making plans now to go back. And verse 15, so the men took that present and Benjamin, and they took double money in their hand and rose and went down to Egypt. And they stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my home and slaughter an animal and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon. Then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. So Joseph is in full charge, full command. He wants these folks brought to his house. He wants his brothers brought to his house. The men were afraid, verse 18, because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, it is because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that we may make a case against us, so that he may make a case against us and seize us, to take us as slaves with our donkeys. Well, that's a logical conclusion, isn't it, that the brothers make? Why are we going into his house? Why are we going into this man's house? They still don't recognize it. They still don't know who he is. He knows that they are his brothers, but they don't know that this is Joseph. This is their brother. And so they're wondering, okay, what do we say and what do we do? And he's going to enslave us. He's going to take all of what we brought. He's going to take that. He's going to take our donkeys and enslave them. He's going to take us. He's going to enslave us. And he says in verse 19, when they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house. They talked with him at the door of the house and said, "O sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food. But it happened that when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weights, so that we have brought it back in our hands." Now remember, money was not coinage. Coinage was, at this point in time, was really not, hadn't started yet. And so it was minerals that usually were of value, and you would pour them out in the powder usually that they were, and so they were in dust form. But they said, the money that was there, it was there in our sacks. We know about it, and he says, we don't want any trouble. Verse 23, but he said, "Peace be to you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your fathers has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." And he brought Simeon out to them. So the man brought the men into Joseph's house, gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their donkeys food. Then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. When Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand to the house, and bowed down before him to the earth. And he asked them about their well-being and said, "Is your father well? And the old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive?" So Joseph's asking some questions, natural questions. He's wanting to know about his father. What about your father that you talked about? Is he still alive? And they answered, verse 28, "Your servant, our father, is in good health. He's still alive." And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. And so they are showing all sorts of respect. They're answering their questions, or his questions. Now, you may recall that one of Jacob's problems, with the boys, and the questioning when they had to send, they were supposed to bring Benjamin back. One of Jacob's questions was, "Why did you tell him? Why did you tell him you had a brother that was still at home?" These guys, they were full of honesty, they were full of straightforwardness, and we appreciate that about them, that they asked a question, they answered it, and they didn't hem-haw around about it. And they're doing it now. You might say, well, they didn't learn their lesson. Well, I don't know that you necessarily have to say that this was a lesson that had to be learned. Joseph asked about father. They give him an answer. Verse 29, then he lifted his eyes, saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Now his heart yearned for his brothers, so Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face, came out, and he restrained himself and said, "Serve the bread." So he's touched, he's moved. He goes in to a whole separate room, has a cry. The emotions that he probably had, the emotions that he felt, just finally got him, and finally got the best of him, which shows us in many ways the heart of Joseph. Take with you this thought. Joseph had gone through a lot. He'd gone through a lot at the hands of his brother. He'd gone through a lot at the hands of people. And you can only imagine, he's head of this food relief program. How many folks, as they were taxed, how many folks for those 7 years of plenty brought their grain in and had something nice to say about Joseph, as opposed to saying something ugly about him? Probably a lot. Folks grumbled and mumbled and complained. Joseph still has a heart that's easily moved by the plight of his brothers. He's easily moved. And so when he gets back into the room after he has had his cry and cleaned himself up or straightened himself up, he comes back in. He says, "Okay, let's serve bread. Let's eat." So they set him a place by himself and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with Hebrews, for that was an abomination to the Egyptians. So they're in the same house, they're setting off apart from each other. And they set before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. Then he took servings to them from before him. But Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank, and they were merry with him. Joseph is watching his brothers. And in many ways, he's putting them to the test. And we'll see this here a little bit more coming up in the next chapter. But he's asking these fellows questions, and he's watching them, and he's listening. Wonder what he's listening for. It's assumption on your part, but what do you think he might be listening for? Remorse. Yeah. What else? See if they've grown up. See if they mention Joseph. See what they tell about with regards to their home life. You know, he would have had, I don't know that I've even read any semblance of it, but he would have had nieces and nephews, and many of them. So he's listening for all of that. I think remorse would be number one on the list, is what he's listening for. I really do. But he's probably also listening for all this other. And he shows a little bit of favoritism towards Benjamin, but don't you reckon the brothers, yeah, we've seen this before, just with him. You know, Benjamin he's come out, since we got rid of Joseph, he's come out being daddy's favorite. And so they see that and they don't get upset. Let's go a different route for just a minute. Let's think about, and this could be discussed a little bit later on, and we probably will when we get into another chapter or two. Let's think about true forgiveness. Somebody does something to you, whatever it may be, says something about you, and admittedly, what one does against you, I realize we hold certain things in higher, heavier standards than others. In other words, if somebody says something against us, or somebody bumps us, we may think about it for a day or two, but then kind of get over it. But if somebody, somehow maybe we go in business with somebody and they take a volume of money away from us, in other words, a large amount of money away from us, we hold on to that pretty hard, because that was money that, was hard to come by, and that was money that was taken from us that shouldn't have been taken. And so, admittedly, there are things that people do to us that sometimes are more grievous than others. But the Bible really looks at it from the standpoint of, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if they, in a business agreement, and they got a large sum of money from us, or if they defamed us, or if they bumped us, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. He uses this idea of forgiveness. And having had things done to me, is like say, I'm sure you have as well, sometimes that forgiveness is hard. Sometimes that forgiveness does not come easy, because we're having to pardon, if you will, them for what they've done to us, towards us, taken from us, whatever it may be. But think about Joseph, and think about his forgiveness of his brothers. In order for us to move forward in our forgiveness, first of all, the one thing that we don't necessarily need from them, but we truly want from them, is for them to admit that they were wrong. But in order for us to forgive them, we don't have to have that. But we have to say, okay, are you willing to say, I was wrong? what I did was wrong. What I did towards you was wrong. I had a secretary years ago, my first secretary. Now Suzanne knows who I'm talking about. Who one day, she and I, we were just talking, and she was telling me about a discussion that she actually had with somebody else. And this was a really wonderful lady. This was a good secretary that many years later, and I'd had 2 or 3 after her in different congregations, but she and her husband came to see us. We were still living in Dixon at the time. And I told her as she walked out, I kind of hugged her, and I said, I want you to know something. She said, what's that? I said, I want you to know that you spoiled me. And she said, what do you mean? I said, you're the best secretary I've ever had to this point in time. And now that I'm my own secretary, that's still true. But she told me of a conversation that she said, sometimes my husband does not say I'm sorry or that I was wrong. But she says, but I know when he is sorry. And she, little clues, maybe like he'll come up and want to help me in the kitchen, or he'll want to, he'll give me a kiss for an unknown reason, or he'll pat me on the back. She said, I know he's forgiven me, or I'll know that he's saying I was wrong, or talking about himself, not her. And I've thought about that a lot of times, that, that is true. I had a guy recently that he did something pretty bad to me and to our family. And I saw him not long ago. He shook my hand and he nodded his head. Somebody told me a few hours later, said that was his apology. Okay, I'll take it. Because I had been praying for a long time that I'd have the heart to forgive him. And I still pray that. Forgiveness sometimes comes hard, but Joseph, I'm sure, wanted them to acknowledge, it's going to get warm one day. And we won't have to worry about that. Joseph, I'm sure, wanted them to admit they were wrong. But then in forgiveness, not only do we want that acknowledgement, but we also have to release them from the obligation. That's what forgiveness is. You've incurred a debt against me, and I've got to let it go. I got to let it go. It may eat on me, but I really got to let it go. And I may come out on the lesser end of this, but I still got to let it go. That's not easy, because we don't want anyone to feel like they got it over on us. But that's what forgiveness is. And then part of forgiveness sometimes is finding the right time to confront them and talk to them and say, hey, let's talk. Let's sit down and let's go over this. Let's iron all this out. Let's put it behind us. Let's move forward. Now, I think in moving forward in that forgiveness, and sometimes the best resolution is to say, but you stay over there and I'll stay over here. It's all forgiven. And I don't hold to the theory of forgive and forget. You might say, well, that's part of forgiveness. I don't think so. I think we always remember the deed. But it's how we hold that deed in our heart, how we think about that deed. And when we bring it up in our memories, what's our attitude towards that deed? Like I say, I think we'll always remember it. But it's, okay, what did I learn from it? Where did I grow in it? What did I gain from it? And like I say, that's not always easy. But Paul said it best in Romans 12. He said, that we should, by all means, try to live peaceably with all folks. And that's the key. I do also like in Romans 12 that idea where it says, if your enemy hungers, feed him. If he thirsts, give him water to drink. For in so doing, you shall heap coals of fire upon his head. You like that part? That's the part we like, right? That's the part we like. But really, it's the idea of kindness towards them. That's part of our forgiveness of them. Did you hear about the story about the lady that came in and she was divorcing her husband? She was mad at her husband, and the judge said, went through and asked her several questions, and finally it came to his mind Romans 12, and he said, have you heaped coals of fire upon his head? And she said, no, but I've thrown hot water on him. I don't. But forgiveness is very hard, and I want to talk about it a little bit more as we get into Joseph. Forgiveness is very hard. Don't, like I say, I've prayed often. I was talking to somebody recently, and there were some issues in their life, and I told them, I said, you got to forgive them, because if you don't, you can't get into heaven. And guess what? You've let them win, and you're spending eternity because of them in hell. They hadn't thought about it that way. So we have to forgive. We have to move on. Like I say, sometimes it's that you stay way over yonder, and I'll appreciate it. But anyway, like I said, we'll talk about that. But anything anybody wants to say about forgiveness? Very difficult. Very challenging.
Something for the older brothers. When I go back and read again verse 14, Jacob gives them their charge. Go do all that. Bring back what's his name, Benjamin.
Yeah.
Yes, that doesn't know what the 10 brothers kind of stand.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yes. That's very true. I hadn't thought about that like that, but yes. Yes. Right. If they're not catching on, they're some of the slowest people in the world. They have to be catching on. But I think surely they are. They just have to be.
I don't know. It just seems like only Reuben is the one who looks back, so he's only really messed.
Yes.
Other time, it seems like that's just something happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I wondered the same, thought the same, but it's interesting. Human nature is interesting. Anything else? Oh, sure. It really does. Really does. Good point. Yeah.
I know what happens if I do this. I know what I felt like when that happened to me. I don't think I'll do that to somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah. I would hope that all of us, I put this burden upon me, and I realize I'm a strange bird. But I hope that in every conversation, every incident, every event that happens, that I learn something and that I grow from it. I'm not the mustard seed guy, but I do believe in growth, and I do believe in continual growth. And so, yeah, I try to, like you say, kind of turn it the other way and say, okay, I don't want to do this to anybody else. And I hope I never have. Remember, too, that our actions, our personal actions, are based upon a lot of things, but we often do not see ourselves as we are. And a lot of times instead of seeing ourselves as we are, we set about to justify ourselves and what we did. And that's a part of human nature that as Christians, really, we need to rethink. We need to rethink. I like the idea of the doctor, the story. I read it years ago of the doctor that had a guest come to his house. It was late in the afternoon, and he had invited this individual, and he went to the door. He invited the guest in, and he said, "Now I've got some work to do in my study." He said, "You're welcome to come in and sit down, and we can kind of talk as I clear up some paperwork and different things, and or you can go over here and just wait, whatever." And so the man came in and he sat in the study with the doctor, and the doctor was fixing his papers and tidying up and loose ends and different things from the day. And the visitor said, "Well, what are you doing?" And he says, "I have made it a point recently that at the end of every day to tie up all loose ends." "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, that's a good personal growth." He said, "Well, you don't understand." He said, "They've diagnosed me with a disease, and I could drop dead at almost any time." And he said, "I may one night go to bed and never wake up." And I realized that. I know I'm at that point in my life. And so I tie up all loose ends at the end of the day so that no one has to tie up those loose ends if I do die. Well, there's several different applications that could be made for that story, but one of them that I make, and supposedly that was a true story, one of them that I make from that story is that each day, really, we should take inventory of ourselves. Where do we stand? What did we do? Do we need to straighten anything out? Do we not need to straighten anything out? Are we all right? Did I turn the tables and not act like I should have, like I learned to, but did I act like what was done towards me? And so that's always something we should do. Anything else?
I sometimes think that Paul had Alexander the coppersmith. He said, "Four kids that."
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Sometimes that's the only way to get through something like that.
Yes, absolutely. Anything else? All good. Well, we begin the 44th chapter. Joseph is once again, I think, testing his brothers, testing their maturity, testing to see if they've grown, what they've learned since they've sold him. Are they better? Are they more what they should be? So he commanded the steward of his house, saying, "Fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry. Put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. I also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money." There's Joseph's plan. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. Soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his stewards, "Get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one which my Lord drinks, with which he indeed practices divination? And you've done evil in so doing.'" Now all of a sudden we get the idea of divination. What is it? Well, it was a practice. I think Brother Clyde Woods in his commentary kind of characterized it as sort of like tea leaf reading, that it was something that was done in that day and age. You poured out a little drink, and then supposedly, depending on how it acted and how it looked, you so to speak, you could tell from the signs. And so this is the charge. The plan is, though, for Joseph, for the brothers to go off. They have everything sort of back in their satchels again. And they have, of course, his cup, his favorite cup, which implies that it would have been a cup that they probably, the brothers, would have recognized as well. It's not theirs. So why have you stolen this? And so, verse 6, he overtook them, he spoke to them these same words, and they said to him, "Why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us, that your servants should do such a thing? Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. There again is something that you see 2 or 3 different times in the Bible, a very rash statement that really was unwise. Well, if you find it, of course, you might say, well, they had faith in themselves and they had faith in each other because they were brothers. I get that. But, okay, if you find it, you just kill us. And he said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. So he searched. He began with the oldest and left off with the youngest. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. They tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. So they tore their clothes. It's a sign of grief. It's also a sign of repentance in biblical times. And so they tore their clothes. They loaded their donkey. They returned to the city. Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. Joseph said to them, what deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? Then Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup was found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he should be my slave. Now remember, who had the cup? Benjamin, Daddy's favorite. Joseph knew this. This was the plan of Joseph. This was one of those plans that Joseph had cooked up. Joseph had probably had time to think about it from the first visit to the second visit. If they bring Benjamin back, okay, what am I going to do? He'd had time to formulate this plan. And you say, well, that's a vengeful act. Yes. And it's not part of the forgiveness that he seems to show. Well, that's right. But it's a plan to get everything into place. And so I agree, you can look at that and you can say, well, that's terrible. But you can also look at that and say, well, look how it came out. Well, was that his end result or his end goal? Well, let's read the story. Then Judah came near to him and said, oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word, my Lord's hearing. And do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said, my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. And we said, my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother come down with you, you shall see my face no more. So Judah opens up, and Judah kind of rehashes the whole story to Joseph. Look, this is what you said. This is what we said. This is what you wanted done. This is what we did. And so we've done everything that you've asked. We've tried to be honest. We've tried to be above board. We've not tried to do anything. We've not tried to steal anything, get anything over on you. We've tried to do exactly as we've said. So it was that when we went up to your servant, my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go if our youngest brother is with us. Then we shall go down. For we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. And the one went out from me, and I said, surely he's torn to pieces, and I've not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hair and sorrow to the grave. In other words, he says, Daddy, this is what Daddy said. Daddy said he's going to die of grief. And I've seen people, and I think you probably have too, that are so eaten with grief that they can't function anymore. Well, I understand a little bit about the grief process, and I'm sure you do too. But a semblance of life may never be the same, but a semblance of life has to be there. You have to move forward. Now, that grief comes by definition. Grief comes when you have a loss of anything. Loss of health, loss of job, loss of a friend, loss of a spouse, loss of a mother, father, any loss. Death is, of course, the one we think of tied with grief, and it is, and it's bad. But also it's any loss. And so, but they said, Daddy's going to grieve himself to death. No. And our other brother, they're still claiming Joseph is gone. Joseph is dead. They make that claim. They're sticking to that claim. Verse 30, now therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the life's lad, it will happen that when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he'll die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad's not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? So all he sees is he stands up, he says, look, Dad's going to have problems with this. This is going to be a difficulty for him. You got to let Benjamin go back. And so Judah really intercedes at that point. Not a lot to say. Anything anybody want to say or add? Well, let's go on. We'll roll in right quickly to chapter 45. Now Joseph is going to reveal himself. We're getting closer to the end. Joseph is going to reveal himself to his brothers. It says Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud. And the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. So now finally the cat is out of the bag. Boy, that was a good one. Y'all all jumped. That was the cat's out of the bag. Joseph finally reveals himself. And not only do the brothers know, and this is something that I think through the years had just kind of over my head, but it's almost as if almost immediately in verse 2 it says everybody else heard about it. I realized everybody else heard about it, but as I was reading this week, I thought, I didn't thought about it in that light. It's almost as if, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's almost as if, I guess a good story, gossip. Of course, this really wasn't gossip. This would have been truth, but it spreads like wildfire. A good story spreads like wildfire. And so this was the story. Oh, these guys were Joseph's brothers. Oh, so Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. Put yourself in the place of one of the brothers. What do we say? What do we do? What do we think? What do we feel? What's our answer? Oh, no. And now he's asking us about Daddy, and if we have to get Daddy down here, or if we have to go back and tell Daddy, we're in so much trouble. So there's a lot of things running through their head, I'm sure. So Joseph said to his brothers, this is verse 4, please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold to Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Verse 5. Verse 5 is a key verse. We're going to find 2 or 3 more key verses in this great story of God's providence as we finish out the book of Genesis in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But here is a key verse. And simply put, Joseph said, this was God's plan. Now, it is interesting that Joseph lets them off the hook. Don't be grieved. Don't get angry with yourself. He, in essence, is telling them, you did this, and you did this to me. But you let yourself off the hook. Why? Because he's willing to let them off the hook. But he says this was part of God's plan. For these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. No success. No farming success. Years of famine. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, the Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. So here's what Joseph's basically saying, and we're going to stop right here. But Joseph is basically saying, look, God sent me here. It's all right. God sent me here with a plan. Famine is still in effect. We've been 2 years in. We've still got 5 more to go. God sent me here to save your life. Now that's important. But from what standpoint? Why is that so important? Why was it their lives that Joseph said God was saving? Because this is Israel, right? This is God's people. This is the folks through that everything had to come through. Now, we can argue about all of that even till today, but that was why Joseph's statement is very true. God sent me to save your folks, your hide, because you're God's chosen. Anything else?
Interesting, it says that he sent everybody out of the room except his brother. As though he'd been talking to his brothers through the church.
Yes.
Now he starts to talk to them in their own tongue. And they now understand something real.
That's a great point. Yes. And that's all true. Yeah. Now they realize. Anything else? Well, let's bow right quick. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day, for the beautiful sunshine, for the spring weather. We're thankful that you love us and watch over us. We're thankful for this beautiful story of Joseph, how that we see your providence and how we learn so much about your providence from the story of Joseph. And we are thankful for the fact that you watch over us and that you care for us. Help us to always have that forgiving heart, that there are times in which people do things to us, whether seemingly insignificant or sometimes even major. But help us to have that heart that is willing to, simply put, forgive and forget, or forgive and move on. Watch over us, bless us, and keep us. Forgive us of our sins, for this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Thank y'all. We'll pick up there. We are moving quickly. We're going to learn about providence as we get to the end of this.